Hey Optimancers, Chris here. The Player's Handbook Playtest 8. Wow! This document is 30 pages long, and for comparison, Playtest 7 was 54 pages long, and Playtest 6 was 77 pages long, but Playtest 8 has done more to address major issues in 5th edition than, well, probably every playtest document we've seen up to now. And that is a surprise because back in June of this year, Jeremy Crawford said that the experimental phase of the playtest process was coming to an end. And now, heck, I'll just play what he said.
We started being very experimental. We started with rules that you and I have even talked about. We didn't even necessarily expect the community to embrace, but we wanted to see the reaction. We wanted to see what is the community's appetite for change. And then again, when it comes to change or told new things, what are the things that really cause people's eyes to light up, that cause people to be excited? And now that we have released playtest versions of all of the classes in the game, save the monk, who will be coming very soon, we're actually nearing the end of the first chapter of our playtest process, which was the sort of, let's see what the appetite for change is. People are then going to see in the upcoming Unearthed Arcanas a return to many familiar things from the 2014 books, but now with some of the new material incorporated.
So basically, Player's Handbook playtests 1 through 5 had the big experimental ideas to gauge our appetite for change and see what makes our eyes light up. And in playtest 6 through 9, we would start to see a return to the familiar from the 2014 Player's Handbook with some refinement and with the experimental stuff that we really liked incorporated. And I don't know why Jeremy Crawford said that, because at the time, it was a bit disheartening to think we had basically seen all of their significantly experimental ideas, and a lot of those weren't going to be worked on more, but just abandoned because they didn't score well enough on a survey, and the 2024 Player's Handbook would basically look a lot like a mix of the 2014 version with some of the stuff from the playtests 1 through 5 incorporated, and that's clearly not what's happening, because we saw huge experimental ideas that, to use his words, made our eyes light up way back in playtest 6. A bunch of subclasses we had never seen before. The complete rework of the trickery domain for clerics. Oh, I love that one so much. That was probably the highlight of the whole document to me. I mean, talk about making my eyes light up. Paladin Smite, completely reworked. Oh, and Cunning Strike for Rogue Sneak Attack. You tell me that wasn't experimental? Then playtest 7, and we're coming in for a landing here. Just a couple more playtests to go, so time to dial stuff in? Nope. Here's 2 brand new subclasses. Check out how we completely reworked the Eldritch Knight. Here's a new never-seen-before high-level fighter feature. Here's a sorcerer feature that's like magical rage, that's out of friggin' nowhere, that scales as you level up, and now it's going to be a central theme of the entire class. Oh, and Warlock Packs, we're making them invocations. And now you get invocations from level 1, and you don't even need to take a pact. Or take all 3, and they're all way different than they used to be. And you won't even recognize the Archfey patron and the Great Old One patron. Oh, and check out this minor refinement of the jump spell. How about that? Not experimental? Really? And so I have abandoned the notion, despite Jeremy Crawford saying it on record, that playtest 1 through 5 was the big idea phase. I don't know whether they changed plans at some point, or maybe he was just trying to reassure us that, don't worry, Pact Magic is coming back. And that might be the case, but I don't know. But if you told me after playtest 7 that playtest 8 would have some big experimental ideas, I don't think I'd be too hard to persuade. Now, if you had told me after the disaster of the monk in playtest 6 that the monk they would present in Playtest 8 would absolutely delight me to the point where I would say on record that they could print it in the player's handbook as presented and the monk would be just fine, I would have been skeptical, sure, but there would have been a little spark inside me that would have held out hope. Yet, that's what happened. The Playtest 8 monk isn't just better than the 2014 monk and the Playtest 6 monk, but it's also better than the vast majority of the monk fixes that I have seen homebrewed by the community, and I was delighted, absolutely delighted by what I saw. Here's where I flat out wouldn't have believed you though. If you had told me after Playtest 7 that not only would the Playtest monk absolutely delight me and for me to consider the monk basically fixed, but that wouldn't even be my favorite part of the Playtest 8 document, you would have lost me right there. There is no way. Well, way. I think my stance is clear that I think outlier spells in D&D need to be addressed. I consider it an imperative, and I've talked about it many times. And I did a video talking about the biggest problem spells in the game and gave some suggestions on how they might be fixed. And I'll link that up above for you. That was back in September. And those problem spells that I listed included Conjure Animals, Conjure Minor Elementals, Conjure Woodland Beings, and Conjure Celestial. I've also discussed the issue with all the Conjure spells. I'll play that clip. Now, before I list the spells and my proposal on how they can be fixed, I do have a few limitations, because we've been told that every spell in the 2014 Player's Handbook will appear in the 2024 Player's Handbook, with the same spell name and the same spell level. So suggesting a spell could be a different level isn't helpful, because it's not going to happen. Whatever changes we do suggest to be helpful, they need to maintain the spell's name and level. However, since we have been promised all the same spells with the same level and same name, we've more recently been promised that all the Tash's summoning spells will appear in the 2024 Player's Handbook. There's no reason to have Summon Elemental and Conjure Elemental as two different spells in the same book. So maybe the plan has changed, but I'll cover outlier conjuration spells as well, just in case. So throwing away all those spells isn't really an option, but keeping them would be a disaster. A disaster that, to be honest, I was starting to brace myself for, by the way. So the designers apparently found a solution. What if Tash's summoning spells were the only summoning spells in D&D? And what if we just designed a whole bunch of non-summoning spells that are all brand new and never seen before, or talked about before, or we'll even hint at before, and slap on names Conjure Animals, Conjure Celestial, Conjure Elemental, Conjure Fey, Conjure Minor Elementals, and Conjure Woodland Beings to those spells? That solution never would have occurred to me. I wouldn't have seen this coming from a mile away. So they found a way to get rid of all of those problem spells. This removes a huge chunk of outlier spells, not by redesigning them, but by finding a clever way to delete them entirely from the game. So, same spell name, same spell level, otherwise there is no point even trying to compare them to the 2014 spells of the same name, because those spells are gone. These are brand new spells. And I know there are players who are still in love with Conjure Animals, so I'd be ready to bet money that there are some players that are absolutely fuming right now to see this, all while lamenting the martial caster divide in D&D, and then using Conjure Animals as the example to show why fighters are still bad in the playtest. Don't worry, you can still use Simulacrum to show that, for now. My reaction to this revelation is the opposite. Seeing a good version of the monk that may more or less be what we get in the 2024 Player's Handbook provides me great delight and joy. But seeing the preview of what will be the official abandonment of these problem spells that frankly I've come to consider toxic to the D&D play experience isn't best described as delight. There is delight, but mainly I would describe my reaction as relief. The plane was going down. The engines were on fire. The ground was coming on fast. I was losing hope that the pilot would right the plane. They just righted the plane. Now, there is still significant work to do. These are not all the outlier spells in D&D, but this is a significant chunk. And Conjure Animals is the poster boy of outlier spells. The snake just had its head cut off. Good friggin' riddance. So I am going to present you 6 brand new spells from this playtest, and I'm going to analyze them, and I'm going to have some real criticisms of these spells. These are not perfect spells. This is, remember, just the first playtest draft that we've been shown, and we're going to have our chance to give feedback, and I certainly will. But anyone who thinks for a moment that I'm not excitedly waiting for the playtest survey so that I can cast my vote as very satisfied down this entire list, then you haven't understood a thing I've said so far in this video. Okay, so let's go. So there are a couple universals for all these spells, and I'm not going to repeat them every time. They all require 1 action to cast, so these are all spells that you can cast in combat, and they're all spells that you would use in combat. There's not a lot of utility here. And they all have a duration of up to 10 minutes using your concentration. Okay? So, let's go. Conjure Animals. A spell called Conjure Animals. Wonder what it does. So, a 3rd level spell for druids and rangers. You summon nature spirits that take the form of a large swarm of spectral animals in an unoccupied space that you can see within range, which is 60 feet. The swarm lasts for the duration, and you choose the animal form of the spirits, such as wolves, serpents, or birds. When a creature hostile to you enters a space within 10 feet of the swarm for the first time on a turn, or starts its turn there, you can make a melee spell attack against the creature. On a hit, the target takes radiant damage equal to 2d10 plus your spellcasting ability modifier. You have advantage on strength saving throws while you're within 10 feet of the swarm, and when you move on your turn, you can also move the swarm up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see. And the upcasting rules: when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, the damage increases by a d10 for each spell slot level above 3. So, to start with, the spell has obvious similarities to Spirit Guardians. The damage is very comparable, and it's the same damage type. Except instead of the spirits flitting around you 15 feet in all directions, it's a large size, so that's 4 squares on a map, swarm of animals that you can move 30 feet independently when you move. That attack creatures within 10 feet when they start their turn there or move within range. And that's another difference. Spirit Guardians is save for half. This is an attack roll, so it's all or nothing. And you could also critical hit with this. Okay, so I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but my assumption reading this spell is that this is a spiritual swarm that doesn't occupy its space. I mean, I didn't even consider the possibility that it did when I read it. However, I have heard that some players have not made the same assumption. In fact, I guess there were very long discussions on my Discord debating if you could move through the spectral swarm at all. So I was asked about it in this post here, and this is a pretty long post to read out, but I can sum up the reasons why some players have come to the conclusion that the area of the spell effect, the large-sized spectral swarm, is occupied and cannot be moved through. And I was asked this question, and I told the poster that I would be answering it in this video, so I'm going to be answering it right now. So the first point made is that the spell says that you need an unoccupied space to place the spectral swarm, and you also need an unoccupied space to move the spectral swarm. And why would you need those if it didn't occupy the space itself? This can be taken as the intent of the designers that the spaces are supposed to be occupied by the spell effect. And I can't disagree that it seems like a needless restriction to require an unoccupied space if the space isn't occupied by the spell effect. I don't agree that it indicates the designer's intent for the effect to be solid. Because, I mean, that is what we're talking about. Well, I think I can prove that it doesn't indicate anything about the intent by providing existing examples where an unoccupied space is required for something that doesn't occupy its space. Here's one that was easy for me to remember because I just did a video about it. This is the Manifest Mind feature of the Order of Scribes Wizard, And we can see right here that it requires an unoccupied space to summon the manifested mind. And we can see right here that we also need an unoccupied space to move the manifested mind. So it's the same as the spectral swarm effect in that regard. However, here it is spelled out for us that the manifested mind doesn't occupy its space. So this gives us a concrete example of not occupying a space, but needing unoccupied spaces for both the initial effect and moving the effect. Now, why does it need unoccupied spaces? And I don't know, but we have existing examples of unoccupied spaces being needed for an effect that doesn't occupy its space. So we can't make any sweeping statements about what needing an unoccupied space means in regards to actually occupying the space, because it seems to go either way. Now, this is going to move the goalposts, but I would imagine the next thing to point out is that the manifested mind specifically states that it doesn't occupy its space. But what if it doesn't specifically say that, like in the case of Conjure Animals? So are there examples of spell effects that require unoccupied spaces for both summoning and moving that don't say whether they occupy a space or not, but we presently assume that they don't? My example that I found was Blade of Disaster. It seems to check all those boxes. Needs an unoccupied space to summon, needs one to move, doesn't say if it occupies a space or not, but I have yet to come across a player that says the 3-foot long planar rift that does damage when you touch it, you can't move past. And the thing is that you can make the argument that it doesn't say specifically that it doesn't occupy the space, but I'd also make the point that it doesn't say specifically that it does occupy this space, because we have cases where they do that as well. Here's the Echo Knight's Manifest Echo feature, which says specifically it does occupy its space. So we don't really have a universal either way. So if a spell doesn't say whether the effect occupies its space, that doesn't say anything either way on whether it does or not. And requiring an unoccupied space, it's kind of irrelevant because we have examples that already exist that can go either way. Another thing brought up in this post is there's another spell here that says it fills a 10-foot cube. And if it says it fills the cube, is it impassable? Again, we have examples to show this isn't always the case. Here's Cloud of Daggers, same wording, fills a cube. But you can totally move through the 5-foot cube of Cloud of Daggers. I mean, that's kind of the point of the spell. That doesn't mean that something that fills a space is always passable, but it just means the wording doesn't matter. It doesn't answer the question. So obviously, if something says it occupies its space, then it does. And if it says it doesn't, then it doesn't. But if it doesn't say either way, I do think we have a conclusive way we can make that determination. So there's really only 3 ways a spell creates an effect that occupies a space or spaces. The first is it creates an object or objects. The second is it creates a creature or creatures, and both objects and creatures already have their own rules for how they occupy spaces or don't occupy spaces, or the spell text says so. So the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide have rules for objects and how they can occupy spaces and inhibit movement, including detailing hit points and armor class of objects. Some spells, like the Wall of Stone spell, give unique hit points and armor class, but one way or another, objects can be attacked, and there are rules for attacking them and destroying them. And if no such rule exists, you didn't create an object. The Player's Handbook has rules for creatures and how they can be moved through, or can't be moved through, that are different than the rules for objects. One universal thing about a creature, though, is it always has statistics. Maybe they're in the monster manual or another source, or sometimes the statistics of the creature are given in the spell itself, like Summon Fey, for example. But if you don't have statistics, then it's not a creature. And if it is neither a creature nor an object, then the rules for moving through creatures and objects just don't apply. You need to rely on the spell text. Does it say it blocks movement? Does it say it slows movement? Does it say it creates difficult terrain? If movement is in any way inhibited by the spell, then it's one of 3 things. It's an object, it's a creature, or it is spelled out in the spell description. The Spectral Swarm of the Conjure Animals spell does not qualify as an object, and it does not qualify as a creature. And it doesn't say anything in the spell description about it inhibiting movement. So the base assumption, as far as I'm concerned, is it doesn't. All that said, I guess the wording should be clarified, or I wouldn't have had to go through all those examples. So assuming this doesn't occupy its space, I still think this spell is a bit overtuned. I mean, not like a spell that summons 8 wolves, that would be absolutely absurd. I'm glad there is no spell that does that. But this is probably better than Spirit Guardians, which is already a good spell. I mean, this can be up in the air too. Really nice spell here. But at least it's not game breaking. Nor is it making the party marshal character irrelevant. So my rating, 10 out of 10, very satisfied. Okay, next spell, Conjure Celestial. This is a 7th level cleric spell. You summon the protective presence of a celestial spirit, which manifests as a pillar of divine light that shines in a 10-foot radius, 40-foot high cylinder, centered on a point within range. Once again, it doesn't say it needs to be on the ground, so I assume you can have it up in the air if you want to. Until the spell ends, bright light fills the cylinder, and when you move on your turn, you can also move the cylinder up to 30 feet. So, similar to Conjure Animals that way. When a creature enters the cylinder for the first time on a turn, or starts its turn there, you can bathe that creature in one of the following lights. Healing Light. The creature that isn't an undead or construct regains hit points equal to 4d12 plus your spellcasting modifier. A creature can be healed by this light only once per casting of the spell. Oh, that's an important wording to have there. And then Searing Radiance. The creature must make a dexterity saving throw, taking 8d12 radiant damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. And at higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 8 or higher, the healing and damage increase by 1d12 for each slot level above 7th, though you can't upcast the 7th level spell very much. Okay, so this is really powerful. I mean, let's say we upcast Spirit Guardians. Well, then we'd be looking at 78 damage for a 7th level slot. That would be 31.5 radiant damage, save for half on average. Here we have 8d12 damage, that's 52 radiant damage, save for half on average. This seems pretty high, though it is a 7th level spell, which probably should be better than a 3rd level spell upcast to 7th level. The healing isn't so much, I mean it's 26 points, but there's a couple nice things here. First is it's 26 points for everybody. I mean, in theory, you can heal a lot of people with Conjure Celestial. The other nice thing is that when we're using this in combat, we can do both. The healing's almost a freebie. It's not costing you extra actions or anything. So this is a pretty powerful spell. Maybe a bit too powerful, though it's not as powerful as summoning a creature that can then change shape into something immune to weapon damage. That would be ridiculous. So my rating, 10 out of 10, very satisfied. Moving on. Conjure Elemental. So here's one that fills its space, but that doesn't mean it can't be moved through. Not going to go through that again. You summon an elemental spirit that fills a 10-foot cube within range. The spirit lasts for the duration and is composed of air, earth, fire, or water, your choice, when you cast a spell. When a creature hostile to you moves within 5 feet of the spirit, you can make a melee spell attack against that creature. On a hit, the target takes 8d8 damage of a type determined by the spirit's element. So if it's earth, it's bludgeoning. If it's water, it's cold. If it's fire. And if it's air, it's lightning. If the target is a large or smaller creature, it's also pulled into the cube because the cube is not occupied and it has the restrained condition. At the start of each of its turns, the target must make a strength saving throw against your spell save DC, and on a success, the target frees itself. On a failure, the target takes 48 of the same type of damage as the spell attack. The spirit can only have one creature restrained at a time. And at higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 6th level or higher, we're getting 2d8 damage per spell level. And I would assume that 2d8 damage applies to both the attack as well as that 48 damage when they're stuck inside it. So, unlike the last two spells we've discussed, it's important to point out that this one does not move. You have a 10-foot cube that stays where you place it, so you either want a choke point or use force movement or something to get creatures into range of the spell. Otherwise, they can just avoid it. Good thing force movement is super cheap now. I mean, imagine the Warrior of the Hand monk, like the new one, using Flurry of Blows. It would be like shove, shove, punch and push, punch and push, punch and push. And all these enemies getting thrown into this thing. Damage, damage, damage. This spell looks like a lot of fun to me. And this one I don't think is overtuned. I think it's pretty much where I'd expect a 5th level spell to be. So 10 out of 10, very satisfied. Moving on, Conjure Fey. You summon the awesome presence of a medium Fey spirit in an unoccupied space you can see within range. The spirit lasts for the duration, and it looks like a Fey creature of your choice. When this spirit appears, you can immediately make one melee spell attack against a creature within 5 feet of the spirit, and on a hit, the target takes psychic damage equal to 3d12 plus your spellcasting ability modifier, and the target must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or have the frightened condition until the start of your next turn. As a bonus action on your later turns, you can teleport the spirit to an unoccupied space you can see within 30 feet of the space it left, and repeat the attack again against a creature within 5 feet of it. And then at higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 7th level or higher, the damage increases by 2d12 for each slot level above 6. Okay, so just quickly, I will say it's a medium Fey spirit, but it is not a creature. Creatures have stat blocks, okay? They also occupy their space, so that's how we know this isn't. So this is a 6th level spell, gives you one attack on each of your turns for 3d12 damage, plus potentially the frightened condition for a short duration. Does that damage seem low to anyone else? And check out the upcasting rules. It's 3d12 base damage, then 2d12 per spell slot level. I'm honestly wondering if the 3d12 was a misprint. Like, maybe it was supposed to be 6d12 or something. As it is, this spell is like really weak. I wouldn't be using any 6th level slot or my concentration on this. Anyways, 10 out of 10, very satisfied. Conjure Minor Elementals. You summon elemental spirits that flit around you for the duration, and until the spell ends, any attack you make deals an extra 2d8 damage when you hit a creature within 15 feet of you. The damage is bludgeoning, cold, fire, or lightning, your choice when you make the attack. In addition, the ground within 15 feet of you is difficult terrain for your enemies, and if we cast this spell with a higher level slot, the damage increases by 2d8, and the range of the difficult terrain increases by 5 feet for each slot level above 4. Kind of like that, they're including the increase of the difficult terrain as well as the damage. And, I mean, this spell looks a lot like Spirit Shroud, doesn't it? But, like, way better than Spirit Shroud. If I am a Bladesinger wizard and I'm using my 5th level slot for 2d8 from Spirit Shroud or 4d8 from this, I mean, that's an easy pick. And with a 10-minute duration, I can use the action outside of combat and cast this, and I might even get multiple combats out of it. It is really strong. So, 10 out of 10, very satisfied. And we finish up with Conjure Woodland Beings. You summon nature spirits that flit around you for the duration, and until the spell ends, each creature you choose that enters the space within 10 feet of you for the first time on a turn, or starts its turn there, must make a wisdom saving throw, taking 5d8 force damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. In addition, you can take the disengage action as a bonus action for the spell's duration. And we can upcast this. If we cast this spell using a spell slot of 6th level or higher, the damage increases by a d8 for each slot level above 5. Okay, so this is like a 5th level Spirit Guardians with a smaller area, right? But for Druids and Rangers. Wait, did I say 5th level? Whoops, designers, you done messed up. Conjure Woodland Beings is a 4th level spell, so presumably this should be 4th level as well, not 5th. And that's a pretty obvious error, so when I rate this spell, I gotta rate it 10 out of 10, very satisfied. And that is all the brand new Conjure spells in this playtest. So my first impressions is that Spirit Guardians just got a lot of company with a number of these spells that compete pretty strongly. But these do look like the first draft you had put on a playtest. Some of them seem out of balance. Some of the wording isn't great. Obviously, they need to make it clear what occupies its space and what doesn't. Some of them are even the wrong level. But this is a good starting place to provide some feedback, which I am going to provide on the comments of my survey after rating very satisfied down the entire list. My only regret is there isn't a very, very satisfied dot to fill in. There is more Playtest 8 stuff to come. This was one heck of a playtest document. And for anyone who thought the 2024 Player's Handbook was going to be like the 2014 Player's Handbook plus errata, here's your evidence that spells are going to be looking really, really different in 2024. Down goes Conjure Animals. Down goes Conjure Animals. Knockout. Until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.